Yeah, thank you very much. And good afternoon. Good afternoon. I get confused with the weather. Uh, it's very clear in Uganda. You have 12 days, 12 days. I mean, 12 hours, 12 hours. It's a bit confusing here. But I would like to take this opportunity to thank SSNC for this invitation. And a lot has been said by the previous speakers, so I think my job will be a little bit easier. But I would like to emphasize the African experience in terms of organic agriculture and how it contributes to providing solutions to food security and improving livelihoods at the same time, protecting the environment and all the other challenges that we are all faced with. And I would like to go a little bit slow, but I will try to speed up because some of the things have already been captured, so it's just providing a little bit of highlight. It is very important to have you highlighted, but it's very important to understand agriculture, the status of agriculture in Africa. And sometimes we tend, all of us, to make a very big mistake, to think that agriculture is all about providing food. And that's from our perspective. But when you ask the farmers and the people who live in Africa, agriculture is a complete livelihood. So it must provide solutions to every aspect of life. Now that's where the challenge starts, because our focus of intervention is on providing food, which is good. But you need also to provide the solutions. Otherwise, people will find agriculture irrelevant. Because life is not about food alone. Food is very important, but it's all about other things as well. And this will bring me to the issue of the cycle of poverty and food security in Africa. We saw that the bigger percentage of the people who are going hungry are in Africa. And the question is it because there is less food grown in Africa? There are question marks, and you can interpret in different ways. Is it because there is less investment in agriculture? Or is it because we are addressing actually the wrong problems, or we're using the wrong approaches? Those are all question marks. But I would also share with you what I think we need to balance, because as I mentioned, people in Africa look at agriculture not only for food. So how do we balance that agriculture is providing the solutions in all this? And then a few highlights on what needs to be done from my perspective for the future, especially looking at Africa as one area which is actually having a lot of challenges. When you look at agriculture, the position of agriculture in most of the African countries, it's actually the big part of the population is involved in agriculture. So if you are to solve problem of climate change, if you want to solve problems of hunger, if you want to solve problems, you need to address this section of the population, which is the biggest section of the population. And for most of the economies, they are largely dependent on agriculture. So you cannot differentiate the importance of agriculture from the rest of the contributions to the economy. And for most of, in terms of foreign exchange earning, most of the agriculture of exports actually agriculture-based for most of the African countries. But it's also important to understand that for most of the African countries, the vast majority of farmers are subsistence farmers, which means they grow a little bit of production for their food, but also be able to sell the excess. And this is a big percentage. And for sub-Saharan Africa, for example, 95% of the farmers are farming on less than 5 hectares. So they're really small farmers. And in Uganda, for example, where we have a population which is now almost knocking 35 million, 75%, I mean 70% of the population are directly involved in agriculture as farmers. So 7% of the population are direct farmers. And you have another 20% directly involved in agriculture-related activities, maybe not necessarily as farming. So almost the entire population is in farming. So it's very important that this perspective, which is typical in most of the African countries, is. But also it's so important to know that the biggest percentage of the poor people who are poor actually are in Africa, like in many other developing countries. And these are the people who are living in the rural areas. Almost more than 70% of the people in Uganda, for example, live in the rural areas. And this is typical in most of the African countries. So rural areas is typically associated with the farming. So they are there, and the only preoccupation is farming. So it's very important to know that when you're talking about poverty alleviation, you're talking about the biggest majority who are rural dwellers and who are farmers. There's a big connection in this. So when we talk about reduction of poverty and therefore reduction of food insecurity, which means making food most available, or we need to look at the local realities that these farmers are facing or are in. Any prescription of solutions which is not based on realities won't work. That's why on a more pessimistic or optimistic, depending on how you look at it, I'm a bit skeptical that however much we pour money in genetic modification, that it will work in many countries of Africa. It can be. We have seen it being tried in many countries for about 3-4 years. It collapses immediately. Why? Because it's not based on the local realities. The local realities, local complexities are a little bit different. And you need to think a little bit more from the perspective of the local realities that you are able. So using local resources is very, very critical for any solution to work. Diversification of crops is part of farming systems in Africa. And any farming system which negates that tends not to work very well, because the complexities in Africa are based on a very intelligent mix of these crops, like we have seen in the previous example. There's a lot of science, and sometimes we tend to overlook this science just because these are initiatives from farmers, and we don't think that farmers are scientific enough sometimes too. But this has worked for them for generations, and if it wasn't scientific, it wouldn't have worked for those generations, ideally. So, but the other most pressing thing out of this diversity is the water management, and which is critical for making, because most of agriculture in Africa is dependent on rain. I mean, we have water, but we don't use much irrigation. Now, how do you manage rainwater in the farm is very, very critical for any sustainability. If the farming system you want to bring about relies more on using water from the lake, and it's good innovation, but not realistic enough in the complex realities of Africa. So we have to look more, how do we save water from the rainwater and use it on the farm. Now, anything which is not close to that tends to be a bit more difficult and complicated to work. So the other interesting thing is that income generation is becoming more critical, because, as I mentioned, farmers depend on farming for their complete livelihoods. Social, the same farm, 5 acres like we saw, it must provide education for the children. That means money, because education is paid. You have to pay. It must be able to meet the health needs. If I fall sick, I have to go to the hospital, I have to pay. It requires money. It has to come from the farm, the 5 acres. It must be able to provide food. That's normally easily met. And the problem is that sometimes we only focus on the food. We forget the others. And in some cases, some farming system is a cultural way of cultural identity. I have been working in the northern part of Uganda. They grow simsim, they grow cotton, they grow beans in a rotation for generations. Now, sometimes maybe the cotton price is very good this season. They will never plant cotton next season, however much they have got a lot of money from cotton. It's against their cultural sequencing of crops. It doesn't matter whatever you say. You can preach. So in some cases, it's a cultural identity. And that's how it has worked. And this is very important for them. So the needs of farmers are complex, and the environmental needs, environmental contribution from the farming system is very critical for farmers. And so the needs of farmers are complex, and we need to look at this complex picture if we are to provide sustainable solutions. And what has come very important is that food is easily met. But what about these other aspects of life? They need income, they need money. And I'm just quoting a study which was carried out by the International Food Policy Research Institute in Uganda, is that 60% of households in rural areas purchase more food by value than they sell. I don't know whether you understand this. It may be a bit complex. It doesn't mean that they buy food, a lot of food. No. But because the other needs that go with food, which they have to pay for because they grow their own food anyway, are more expensive than sometimes the food they sell, which means if they are not linked to a market which brings in income from the amount of food they are able to sell, then their livelihood is incomplete and it can't function normally. And that contributes to the cycle of poverty that we have seen, that, okay, they are growing the food. They can only eat maybe a third of it throughout the year. But the 2/3, if they get less value out of it, then they cannot meet the other needs that are important. And what results in that? Poverty, demotivation, and reduced farming in the subsequent seasons. So access to market to contribute to income, to contribute to the rest of the livelihood challenges is very, very critical when we're talking about food security in general. So, and the study concludes that the ability of agriculture to generate income for the poor, particularly the women, is more important for food security than its ability to increase the food supplies. I hope you understand that. It's very, very critical. If it doesn't have the ability to bring out income, it's because producing food in the African setting is very easy because most of the people are involved in farming. So it's quite, either you can enjoy the dried organic fruits from Uganda, 100% organic, dried pineapple. It has been dried using 100% solar energy, and 100% this specific one by women. It's a women group producing this. So you can have 3 values. So this finding from the Policy Research Center also concurs very well with the findings from the CEDA-funded POPA project, which was running in Uganda and Tanzania, where those farmers that were linked to the market through the POPA project, so they had access to market, in a survey which was carried out, were also found to be the most food secure, which means there is a very strong connection between access to market and generating income to the sustainability of food production and the elimination of food security. And it's basically because of the reasons we have just seen above. So in many African countries, smallholder farmers are practicing traditional farming systems, which more or less close to organic farming. And this has been very critical in terms of generating food security. And the use of chemical fertilizers is very, very limited. I mean, like a country in Uganda, we have probably one of the lowest usage of, you only have the average use of 1 kilograms per hectare of synthetic fertilizer in the whole country. And so organic agriculture becomes more handy for most farmers as a farming practices. It's closer to traditional farming practices. It has low market entry barriers. I can tell you that right now to export a product from Uganda, it's easier to export an organic than to export a conventional product. Why? If you're exporting fruits and vegetables, it's complicated because the requirements on chemical tests, residue testing is out of the reach. Actually, in 1997, we had about 77 companies exporting fresh pineapples from Uganda to Europe. Right now, we have only 10, and they are all organic. Because the conventional, because these are small to medium companies, they could not go through, and of course, the other factors like competition and what, but they could, it's very expensive to go through the requirements of chemical tests. You know how expensive the professor probably can tell her. And this is out of the reach for most of the African. But of course, there's an opportunity. There's increasing demand for organic, not only in the export market, but the local markets actually in Africa moving very, very well. Still small, but moving very, very fast, probably faster than even the export market, if you're talking about speed and growth. So there's an opportunity that farmers who are organic actually can take advantage of these markets. It's just an example of traditional farming practices, local practices. This is a pineapple field when it's just being established. And this is based on the traditional practices. These are pineapple plants. In the middle, they mulch with the maize, the remains of maize plants. And there's a plant here, it's a jack bean, which is a nitrogen-fixing plant. So it actually fixes almost more nitrogen than in a season than the synthetic fertilizers. So farmers apply it in the first 18 months before the first harvest of pineapples. And after the pineapple plants have established, then they have a lot of reserve of nitrogen. They keep on adding other bio fertilizers like manure, but it's enough to sustain, because an average pineapple farm in Uganda lasts for about 8 years. Now, in most countries, it's 2 years and slashed. So these are tradition. There's nothing that is out of reach. So traditional practices, this is an established farm. This is almost towards the end of the 7 years. So it is very important that farmers plan and they look at what can work based on the local practices. This is an example of a farmer harvest. This is a certified farmer supplying one of the companies that is exporting, because the connection of the farmers to the market, the whole chain, is very, very critical for also stimulating increased production, because there's stronger motivation for income. This is one of the farmers collecting pineapples. This is a collecting center for farmers. So you have the farmers in the field, and then from the group, they have a center where they collect pineapples, which are ready. If you could see, these are different farmers, and these pineapples here belong to one farmer. This is another farmer. This is another farmer here, and they queue. So farmers in a group come together, and they sell their pineapples together. And for them, that makes a lot of sense. They are produced together. They advise each other. Actually, farmers know a lot. They have a lot of information. And sometimes they don't need to be lectured, because they have a lot of knowledge which should taken advantage of and built for sustainable system. And in many cases, because I'm trying to show the diversity of crops, you have farmers growing pineapple, but they also have bananas. It is very typical that pineapple fields are intercropped with the bananas, and this can be, these are small baby bananas, also for export, but also you find in the same farm that they are growing beans, they are growing the cassava, they are growing sweet potato for domestic consumption. So they have food for them, but they also have maybe 1 or 2 crops which is generating income. And that's for them very, very important for sustainability. This is one of the pineapples before leaving the farmer's center. And this is pineapple at the export company. This is the managing director of the export company working with this group of farmers, this lady. And these are pineapples coming to Germany, Switzerland. So organic has been able to provide this kind of leverage for farmers, that it's addressing the diversity, it's using local resources. And I remember we asked one farmer, because at one time there was a problem where cotton prices went down and globally. And the government of Uganda was, and the margin between organic and conventional was not much. And the government of Uganda was trying to dissuade farmers from practicing organic cotton because there is no premium on the cotton. And when they went, we said, anyway, you can't talk to the farmers. And the response from the farmers was, it doesn't matter, because even if there is no premium, we are producing cheaper. So at the same price with the conventional farmers, we still make a bigger profit because our cost of production are lower than them. So it still makes sense. I mean, it's not about the premium, but it's about how much you make on top of your cost of production. And that's typical for many products in Africa. And just looking at the benefits, this is from an export from the POPA program. You see that out of the premium, where premium is offered, you have a bigger percentage of this premium going to the smallholder farmers, 37%, as against the other costs that are involved in operating an export chain. And that means that for most of the chains, if you compare organic and the conventional in the African setting, you actually, organic farmers are getting a better deal. And this is just looking at the premium alone. But remember, even at the same price, the cost of production for organic farmers is far much lower. And so they still get, and that's why when you look at total income, I have another slide which I didn't include here. Look at total income for most of the products which are exported. We have seen that organic farmers have a difference of total income compared to conventional, ranging between 100 and sometimes up to 200% higher than their conventional counterparts in terms of total income from the farm. And basically because it's not about the premium alone, but also the cost of production is much lower for organic farmers. So we have seen also the global demand, and it's contributing. Just giving you some figures about Uganda, and which is very interesting about what we are seeing as trends. We are seeing that last year we had the exports, only exports of 42 million US dollars, just organic exports. We also saw that the organic exports were growing at an average of 7.4% in 2008, 2009, and the following year, 2010 to 11, it doubled to around 13.2%. But at the same time, conventional exports were going down, and they continue to go down. And that, because of the reasons I've mentioned, it's becoming very difficult and expensive to export, to prove that the residue, the residue requirements for the European market, which is the same also for the other major developed markets. So we are seeing that exports are going down in the conventional. And you can imagine the impact that farmers that have been involved. So organic is providing an opportunity from all fronts, from the environment, from the safety of food, and from the access to market. And that's very good for the farmers. So this is, I think, my last slide. So what does it mean? How do we take advantage of this? How do we build this kind of opportunity that builds toward sustainability, where we are having environmental benefits, we are having income generation, we are having food, and we are having utilization of local resources. There are quite some challenges. I think, in my opinion, these are the ones which needs to be addressed. By the way, this picture is one of the organic basket delivery schemes we have in Uganda. So you can order online and then the products are delivered to your home. It's a basket. You have the banana, you have the other organic products. Yeah, but one of the things is that it's very important to build the institution. We are just talking with the Harvey. One of the biggest challenges in Africa is institutions, the availability of institutions, because institutions, whether in the private sector, are critical in functioning. Institutions are critical in driving the benefits. So it's very, very important to coordinate and build these benefits. But there are also challenges in the rest of the entire chain. One of the things I was discussing with Peter, last year, we had orders of organic products worth 200 million US dollars. I'm talking about real orders, because we profile them as NOGAMU. Every order which comes from the companies, we provide them. We are only able to provide 42 million US dollars. Now, you could imagine the benefit that the farmers would have got if we were able to. And what are the challenges? Of course, most of the farmers are not certified. We, as NOGAMU, we have directly working with 1.2 million organic farmers. Only close to 200,000 farmers have international certification. It doesn't mean that the other are not organic. They are already organic farmers for many years, but the certification process is very expensive, and there's no way you can enter the export market without certification. That's still a challenge, that we are not able to. We have the products anyway, but it's one thing to have the products, and the other thing to meet the requirements of the market. And we need interventions to kickstart these processes. For example, you need about 15 US dollars, 15 euros per farmer to go through a certification process, even if they're in a group. But it's not possible for, especially when you're starting with these farmers, to have this money ready with them. They can pay for the subsequent certifications, but the initial certification has to be supported by somebody, whether it's government or a project like we had the EPOPA project. It's very critical that this process is kickstarted for farmers to be able to enter into the market. Then they can sustain themselves, because the income they get is enough to sustain these certifications. And then, of course, this focus on research, very, very critical, to come up with new ideas, new innovations, quality improvements, quality systems, packaging, product improvement, product development. There's a lot of research required to match the dynamics and trend in the market, so that more farmers can take advantage of this. That's just a picture of farmers. We are organizing this year in northern Uganda, where it has been a lot of war. And it's interesting that when you invite farmers of a market opportunity, they all flood. They all want to be part of this. They want to access this market, because it's very critical. That's just organic shop in Uganda, local vegetables, and some exotic vegetables which are supplied in the market. That's a sesame field. The part I wanted to show that how farmers are innovative. If you see the sunflower in the middle there, this is sesame. Farmers grow sesame in rotation. So they grow sesame this year, the following year. But in the sesame, to wade away all the pests, they intercrop with sunflower. And the brightness of sunflower attracts all the pests so you will have pests eating all the sunflower, and they leave the sesame. And a lot of diversity forests are very, very critical, and this is building a strong and stable ecosystem. Thank you very much. Thank you.